And we are here today with a gentleman who is part of the Rational Ignorance podcast I've been enjoying very much recently. It's one of those, it's a good thinker podcast, one that, a lot of people who listen to my shows, like the ones I've done with Tom Everett or with Jack Thomas about the concepts of good and evil, those sorts of ideas and more abstract things that kind of help people rationalize the craziness of life. In a lot of ways, the Rational Ignorance podcast does that great. So I'm here speaking with Craig Van Slyke. Craig, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm a little tired, but it's been a long day, but I'm very happy to be speaking with you tonight.
Wonderful. Yeah, because you're obviously you're over in America, which is always fun. A lot of my guests are from America, but you're soon to be, when this airs, it will be long in the background, but you're actually attending a podcasting convention, aren't you?
Right. The Podcast Movement Conference, which it's my first time coming, but I think it's going to be interesting and educational. At least I hope it is. So.
And you'll make loads of connections. So that's going to be, that's one of the fun things of podcasting is that the community element of it is really good. I've made so many friends due to podcasting. A lot of the time it's like, hey, I want to have a 2-hour-long conversation with someone. And it's like, but I don't know you. So yeah, but I got a podcast. It's like, oh, that's normal then. Let's do it. So what do you tell people? What do you tell people about the Rational Ignorance podcast? And I know that in the show you like to define what rational ignorance is. So the floor is yours, kind sir.
Well, so we kind of fell into the Rational Ignorance name for our podcast. Andrea, my co-host, actually came up with it. It's a concept from economics, political economics, that essentially says that for most rational people who are voters, it's rational to stay ignorant about the issues because the cost of the information acquisition, getting all the information, processing it, that sort of thing, is way more than the value of your vote. If you have 330 million people or whatever we have in the US and a couple 100 million voters, well, your vote doesn't really make a difference at the margin. Now, Andrea will vehemently disagree. But the gist of it is there are things where it actually is rational to not go out and try to find information. And so that we just thought it was catchy. It's two words kind of opposed to each other that don't normally go together. But really what we try to do on the podcast is get to the heart of something that's important without overloading people with information. Although we're 2 PhDs, so I think sometimes our conversations get to be a little overloading even for us, but we try. And so we try to really get at what's important. And that's the theme for our podcast. We want to really get at what's important to help people live really well, live excellent lives.
Mm. And what exactly, if we start with podcasting, I'm always intrigued by how people first heard of podcasting. I think my origin story in air quotes, I liked a rapper called Scroobius Pip that a friend of mine showed me. I got into Russell Brand's YouTube show, and then Russell Brand was a guest on the first episode of Scroobius Pip's Distraction Pieces podcast. So I just randomly got into 2 people at the same time, and then they did a podcast together. And huzzah, that's how I found out about podcasting. So with yourself, was there a podcast that you first heard? Like, how did you become aware of podcasting, and then why did you then want to create your own?
Well, I've been a talk radio fan for as long as I can remember. Not any particular genre. I just kind of enjoy it, learn some things, and have a bit of entertainment sometimes. And so when the internet started coming around, I'm old enough to remember when people didn't know what the internet was, and the internet radio became a thing. So all of a sudden, this whole world opened up to us where you could listen to, stations from around the world or from anywhere. And so I actually went out and bought a device called an internet radio. Now this seems so ridiculous, but I paid, a couple $100 for this radio that you could actually, through a dial, connect to your Wi-Fi and then tune in all these internet stations. And so it was just a natural extension from there when podcasting became more popular. Podcasting is amazing because not only does it democratize information, it takes very little equipment, very little money to get started with a podcast. So virtually anybody can do it. But it just gives you this, this almost limitless number of different issues, different things you can get into, and all on your own time. I grew up in a time where if you wanted to listen to music, you listened to the music that the DJ on the radio station wanted you to listen to in the order in which they wanted you to listen to it. And so even something like cassette tapes were really cool because you could make your own, sequence, your own playlist. And so podcasting just seems like a natural extension of that on-demand world that we've moved into. And so I can't remember the first podcast I listened to. I really, I can't really come up with what the first one was, but it just seems like it's been part of my life for the last, 10 years or so. I've got a dozen or so that I listen to semi-regularly, and it's just great. And so, hey, these people are doing this, why can't we do it? And so Andrew and I talked about it and decided we'd give it a shot. And, so far, so good.
It's very rewarding, podcasting. It's one of those things because I've been podcasting now. When this comes out, it will be near 4 years, I think, around that sort of time. So I'll have been, Genuine Chit-Chat is 4 years old, and my Star Wars show, it's about a year and a half old ish. So like for me, the thing that I found most surprising about podcasting is it's helped me being a conversationalist. Like I've always been talkative, but I would talk too much and not listen enough. And obviously when you're in a recorded medium, you have to let the other person speak. That's kind of the point. So that helped me in that regard. But also I've met so many cool people through podcasting, obviously such as yourself, but just hearing opinions and views and just interacting like outside of the podmosphere with lots of people about, there's a whole Discord chat where my Star Wars podcast airs on Comics in Motion. There's 12 or 15 people in there now where we're just, we've each got a show or each involved in the show in some way. And we have conversations about nerdy stuff and things. It's just a real nice little community. So sort of linking in with that, what made you how did you meet your co-host, Andrea? And was there a specific moment that made you want to start the podcast, or was it kind of just something you kind of toyed with for a while and let's just do it?
Well, Andrea and I worked together. So I was dean of the business school at Northern Arizona University, which is not what people think of when they think of Arizona. It's actually up 7,000 feet elevation, lots of snow in the winter. It's just a beautiful place. And so I was fortunate enough to be the dean of the business school there. And I met Andrea, who at the time was working on a project called Philosophy in the Public Interest. And she was interested in getting business school students engaged in some of these philosophical issues and kind of thinking about things in a different way. And I'm a big believer in gaining the ability to look at things from multiple perspectives. We get in our own little silos, our little mental spaces, and it's really hard to get out of that. And I think it's very important for all of us to gain the ability to say, well, wait a second, let me turn that cube a little bit and make it a diamond. And so I was all for it. And we actually had a lot of success with her engaging the business students in discussing, things like climate change and immigration, which is a really hot topic in Arizona. And so these controversial topics, but coming at it in a civil, fact-based way. And so I actually ended up hiring Andrea to work in the business school in one of our outreach programs. And then I left the dean's position and then left the university, and Andrea did at about the same time. But we've stayed in touch because we come at things from different perspectives. I'm a public school boy. All my degrees are from public institutions. I was motivated to get my degree and start making money, so I didn't quote unquote waste. People that are listening can't see my air quotes over waste, but waste my time studying philosophy and history and that kind of thing. And so I came to it kind of late in life, but she helped me see a lot of the value that we can all get out of some of these ancient texts and longstanding ways of thinking about things. And so we've stayed in touch through the years since I left Northern Arizona. And we were talking one day and I said, Andrea, I think we should start a podcast. And her eyes kind of lit up and she said, I do too. And so we probably spent 3 or 4 months planning before we actually launched the podcast. But it was really just something that I wanted to do because I think it's cool. I mean, I just think it's cool that you can record your voice and put it out there, and people all over the world can hear about it and hear what you have to say. But really, more importantly, I'm driven by a desire to help people live excellent lives. I've tried to do that as a college professor. I tried to do that as a dean. And now that I'm back to being a college professor, that's what I really feel like my purpose is in life. And so how can you extend your reach? I can talk to my students about, how do you make these kinds of decisions and how can you think about this or that? But that's limited. I can write a book and, I do a lot of writing. So yeah, maybe I could do that. Or let's start a podcast. And so that's what we've done. And we're trying to really, that's our mission, is we want to help people live excellent lives in kind of the deepest sense of that phrase. So that's where we are. We've been at it for, 3 or 4 months now. And I think we're getting there. I don't know. Still have a long way to go. 4 years, I'm thinking, wow, that'd be great to be 4 years in.
Well, we were speaking before, pressing record. You listened to a couple of my prior episodes, which I always appreciate anyone listening to other episodes of mine. And with Francesca Rhiannon of the Writer's Voice podcast, she's been in the game for like 15 plus years now. And I mean, deservedly so, she's got the platform she's got. But I was just like, that is incredible. I mean, I started like a YouTube show in college, which was over a decade ago now. And I'm just thinking, if I'd have just done podcasting instead, I wonder where I would be, in a sense, like in the podmosphere of being one of the really, really early adopters. But, I would have probably been a terrible podcaster, because about 10 years ago, I was a bit of a dick. So I was a teenager and I probably thought everyone wanted to hear what I had to say, when in reality, I was probably spouting off nonsense for just a lot of the time, with like little nuggets of gold maybe in betwixt. They're just nonsense. But as I've kind of gotten older and things, I like to think that I'm somewhat more refined, but who knows, maybe not.
So just to be clear, you're not a dick anymore. You haven't just learned how to hide it. Is that right?
More or less. There's still, unfortunately, I do have dickish tendencies, but I'm like actively trying to not be a dick. So like if I'm about to do something that could be considered dickish, word of the day, then I'm kind of, I like to think a lot of the time I'll have that moment to hesitate and think, do I really want to say this thing? Is this really necessary? Do I want to get into an argument with someone about this thing? And most of the time now, I don't do that. Whereas, when I was a teenager, it was kind of, I was quite gung-ho with things, oh my God, this person disagrees with me. Let's debate them. It's like, not everyone wants to debate you. Sometimes people just want to talk and not have you vehemently disagree with them. And I was always up for hearing other people's opinions, but the way I would go about it would make it sound like I didn't want to hear it. Right. So that took me a while. But your whole podcast, the whole, you want to help people and you want to hear sort of alternative perspectives and things. It's very important. I mean, I know in America and also in England, you got the tribalism and the politics of things, and obviously social media and all kinds of things that are just making people in a lot of ways more and more divided. And I think podcasting in a lot of ways is kind of filling the gap in the middle of a lot of the people who have either more central ideas, or people who are more willing to listen to either sides, if you know what I mean.
Right. And that's one of the things that Andrew and I try to do is the fancy term for it is civil discourse. Mm. So we have one of our little cover art things is actually a Venn diagram. Remember Venn diagrams from school, where she's on one side and I'm on the other, but there's this overlap, and that really describes us. So, we have a number of things in common, but she's, compared to me, she's pretty far to the left. I'm kind of I don't know how to describe myself. I'm probably a conservative leaning libertarian. I'd say socially conservative. I mean, socially liberal, physically conservative, but that just sounds so cliche. I'm not sure I want to say that. But, we sometimes disagree on things. But what we do is we always try to take the perspective of, maybe I can learn something here. So I'm a big believer in, we should be constantly testing our assumptions. We have all these assumptions that we carry into the world. It's the only way we can get through the day, is we've got assumptions about everything. And for important matters, I think we should continually be asking this question: what if my assumption is wrong? And then test that assumption. You can do some research, you can talk to some smart people, you can just reflect on it, but you're going to have one of two outcomes. Either you're going to realize your assumption is not 100% right, and so you're going to adjust your assumption, which hopefully will move you closer to the truth of whatever it is, or you're going to hold on to your beliefs more strongly because you've subjected them to this test. If you just believe things and you never really question them, well, what's the basis for your belief? And so I view it as a win-win. If your assumptions are wrong, you learn something. If your assumptions are right, well, now you can hold your beliefs, more confidently. And so Andrea helps me do that because, she'll push back on things and I'll push back on her. Sometimes I have to admit, you're talking about being dickish. Every once in a while, I'll do it for sport, but just to see what happens. But, it's just a really good way to think about the world. But that's part of what we're trying to do in the podcast is, look, you can disagree. That doesn't mean that either one of you is evil or an idiot. It just means that you bring different things into whatever this issue is. And let's try to see if we can understand the other perspective.
And has that been something that you've always kind of adhered to, or is that something you've kind of, as you've gotten older, have become more attuned to listening to other people's perspectives?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was almost laughing when you were talking about your younger days because I had to always be right.
Yeah, same.
And I would point out when other people were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, I guess when I started to get all this gray beard, it was like, there's just no point in that. If my wife said, so-and-so called on Tuesday and they called on Wednesday, well, who cares? Now, if she says, now you're going to your podcast conference on Wednesday and I'm going on Tuesday, that needs to be corrected. But, most of the stuff where somebody's wrong a little bit, who cares? What difference does it make at the end of the day?
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized that I wanted to value relationships more than winning arguments. But it was not I'll admit it was not an easy road to get there. I was pretty adamant about being right all the time in my younger days. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you or not, but
100%. I used to. It took me a while to realize that being right doesn't mean you're happy. My dad, my late dad, bless him, I loved him to pieces, but he would never ever admit he was wrong ever. Like that, and that's one thing that when he passed away, which was when I was 19, when that happened, it. Obviously, I say it all the time on the show, but it's just like, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it's the best thing that ever happened to my character because it really made me look at myself and reevaluate things. It took several years to do so. But it made me kind of realize, I was like, the things I dislike about my dad the most was how much of a dick he was when he thought he was right, when he was either wrong or it just didn't matter and he wouldn't leave it. And then I found myself doing the same sort of things, either in romantic relationships or in just friendships and those sort of things, just any kind of relationship. I was finding that I wouldn't say sabotaging, but it was more so I wasn't helping them just so I could have it was the ego. It's basically my ego was more so the front and center of a lot of my relationships I was having. And it was like me being right is more important than this person being happy. And it's like, as you say, that there are certain scenarios where it's different. There is the odd time where if Megan, my girlfriend, gets a little bit annoyed about this sometimes because if there's something we're disagreeing on and it's like something that's objective, so it's like this song released in May 1999 or something, and one of us is saying, no, it released in 2001. After a while, I'll just Google it. And then I'm just like, look, either you're right or I'm right. Normally she's right a lot of the time, which works for me. It's just like, cool, I need that ego to be kind of pushed back a bit. But like before the internet, because, even when I was in college and stuff, that was around the time everyone started having mobile phones, but having the internet on your phone was still very expensive and that sort of stuff. So you couldn't just whip out your phone, load up Google in 5 seconds and have the answer. It would either cost money or take ages. So, and even obviously prior to that, it was even less so. So it did take a while of me being basically kind of self-sabotaging. But then I did look at myself and go, I need to value people more than my own ego in essence. And it just took a while to do that.
Well, that's 2 quick comments. Those kind of disagreements, even when you're right, you're wrong. I've learned that one over the years. So, it's just, maybe it was 2000, maybe it was 2001. Doesn't really matter. We've got the right general era. So, but the other thing is that when you get to the point where relationships are more important than your ego, it's at least in part a result of you having more confidence. A lot of times we have to be right because we stoke our ego, but that comes from some sort of insecurity. And so once you kind of let go of that and say, I don't always have to be right, or I don't have to always prove that I'm right, you're really showing that you're, I don't know, this is going to sound kind of weird, you're right often enough to where you don't have to prove it all the time.
Very well said.
I mean, we're watching the Olympics. These amazing athletes don't have to prove that they're the best when, they're playing pickup basketball or something. They don't have to prove they're the best. They know they're the best. And so they have that level of confidence. And so I think that's something that maybe some people get early in their lives, but I really think you have to learn the costs of placing your ego above the needs of other people before you kind of really internalize, I don't need to stroke my ego that much. I'm okay with being wrong. This relationship is more important to me.
No, I agree completely. It is one of those things. It is ego, and it does come from insecurity. My dad, above pretty much all else, valued his intelligence, and then I started to put all my value in intelligence. And then when I would potentially realize I wasn't the smartest person in the room, which is quite rare for me to be the smartest person in the room, but like, if I ever felt like I wasn't, I would have to kind of try and prove that I was, even though no one who's truly intelligent most of the time really cares how intelligent they are compared to others. And the big thing, especially learning, is that intelligence comes in so many different facets. Like I've got friends who are incredible at academia, but they've got no common sense at all. And then I've got other friends who are incredible at like making things with their hands and being really resourceful and that sort of stuff, who are useless with computers. And it's just, there's all kinds of layers. There's only so much humans can be good at as an individual. And so trying to think you're the best at everything, you're just not going to be. And when you kind of recognize that can be a thing. And it's exactly what you say. I wanted to be the smartest person in the room. I was evidently not. So I would try and prove that I was, instead of just accepting it.
Right. And really the smart thing to do is to sit back and listen and to value those relationships. I don't know, Andrew would know this, but I think it was Socrates that said something along the lines of, the only thing that I know is that I know nothing. And so, really smart people come to the conclusion that they really don't know all that much. And so they're willing to be wrong. They're willing to learn. They're willing to try to work with others to increase our understanding. So.
Yeah, it is one of those things. It's something that's very undervalued. And when I eventually become a parent, which hopefully won't be for several more years yet, but when I eventually do that, it's going to be one of those things I learned sort of from my dad. Was just like, there was many great lessons of my dad, and he was great in so many ways. But it was like I had a discussion. Who was it with? I can't remember who it was with, but I was having a discussion with someone, and what their parent, I think, was generally the same. And it's one of those things that my dad used to, if he was wrong and he knew he was wrong, he wouldn't say it, but then the next day he would buy you something. And it's like, I don't want this thing. Like, I love this cool new Star Wars toy. That's awesome. But I don't want this. I just want you to admit to me that you're sorry and that you were wrong. So I can then kind of be like, oh, it's okay to be wrong. And it's one of those things where I was Chris Brayton, that was it, who I spoke with. And he came on the show a little while ago. And saying that you're sorry and accepting that you are wrong, I feel like it is perceived on the outset as a weak move, but I think it's one of the strongest moves one can make, is that you're opening yourself up to vulnerability and say, I don't know everything.
Right. Yeah, that's really true from a leadership perspective as well. A leader who can admit that they've gotten something wrong, and there's a point at which you're wrong too often, and that's a really bad thing. But it up until that point, you're going to increase your people's confidence in you if you're willing to admit that you're wrong. I had a spectacular failure not too long after I became dean. I put a program in place that I was just convinced was going to be wildly sorry. My cheap headset was slipping. So
No
I did this program that I was just sure was going to be successful. We talked to industry people that were going to guarantee that they were going to send their folks into this master's program. And after about a year and a half, we had 12 or 14 students signed up. And it was just pointless to go on with the program. So I even though it was my idea, I said, look, we've done all we can do. The market's just not there. We're going to kill this thing. And I remember one of the really senior faculty, when I sent out the email that said we were going to kill it, he said, I know that was really hard for you to, kill this program because it was your baby, but, I have a tremendous respect for the fact that you were willing to do it.
Mm.
And so, I don't know, probably would have been better if the thing had been wildly successful, but the worst thing I could have done was just hold on to it because it was my idea and I thought it was right. At some point, you just have to admit, things just didn't go our way. Or, maybe it was a bad idea. Maybe the market changed. I don't know. But the deal is that this is a bad idea now. And so regardless of whether or not it looked like a bad idea back then, it's a bad idea now. We're not going to do it anymore. And so, if someone's a kind of leader where they're just going to dig their heels in and keep throwing more and more money and effort into a project like that, it just undermines their credibility in a huge way. So, as long as you don't do it too often, saying I was wrong about this can really boost you in a lot of ways.
And also, I think humans, we're very flawed creatures in itself anyway, but I think that so many people learn from mistakes. I mean, that's how, even if you go back to early humans, like how do we all know that fire is hot? Well, because we've got burnt by it, even as kids, not maybe horrendously burnt or anything like that. But the general rule of things is, how do you know you shouldn't run into the table? Because normally you're a 2-year-old and you do it at some point when no one's around to stop you. You smack your head and it really hurts. You're like, I should probably not do that again. And it's just humans learn by mistake. The amount of people who are told, kids and adults, you tell them not to do something and they just will not believe that you shouldn't do this thing. And then once they do it and then they hurt themselves or it all goes wrong and then they go, I'm not going to admit you're right, but I'm not going to do that again. So it's,
right.
This is what mistakes really help people grow so much as individuals. And I want to ask you actually about something that you mentioned when we got into contact and things, and it's about Stoicism, which you are. Well, I'm going to leave the floor to you. Why don't you define Stoicism and why it intrigues you? Because I'd love to hear it, and I'm sure the audience would too.
Well, I want to preface this by saying I am not a Stoic scholar. It's something that I kind of backed into through mistakes, through figuring some things out, and then learned that there was actually a philosophy that I could have saved a lot of years and a lot of anguish if I'd have known about this philosophy. But basically, Stoicism is a philosophy that came out of the Greeks and the Romans that says you want to try to enjoy life. The Stoics, if you say Stoic to most people, they picture this emotionless, stony-faced dude that doesn't ever feel anything, and that's just completely wrong. What the Stoics want to do is they want to control negative emotions so they can maximize the way they feel positive emotions. And they do that primarily through the application of logic. They've got a number of different practices, but the Epictetus, who was a slave, one of the early Stoic writers, opened up his book, the Enchiridion, I think is how you say it, but it's the handbook. And he basically says there are some things that are up to us and there are some things that are not. And then he goes on and basically says, what's up to you is your own opinion of things. So something is bad because we think of it as bad. It's not necessarily objectively bad. I mean, I think we could argue that some things are objectively bad, but you lose out on a job. Well, that's a bad thing, right? Well, maybe. Only if you look at that as being a negative event is it going to harm you emotionally. And so they want to look at everything from a rational perspective of is this thing objectively bad, or is this something that I can change my perspective on? Like being wrong is a good example. Well, being wrong is bad only because you think being wrong is bad. Being wrong is actually really good. You just said it. If you look at being wrong as a way to an opportunity to grow and to learn. And so just by shifting your perspective of being wrong from being a bad thing to being a good thing, now when you're wrong, it's instead of like, dang, I was wrong, I'm an idiot. It's like, I was wrong about that. I've learned something today. So now I'm a little bit better off than I was when I thought I was right. And so you can look at a lot of things that way. And what flows out of that, some things you can control and some things you can't, is this attitude. And this is more me than maybe all the classic Stoic texts, is it tends to give you a focus on what you can control. So if you'll indulge me with a little story here.
Please do.
My first wife, we re-met at our must have been our 20-year high school reunion. We'd known each other in high school, never dated, anything like that. Met at the reunion, ended up getting married. We were married for a few years, and then she started having some pain in her hip and thought it was, went to her doctor. It was probably just a pulled muscle or something like that. And so it went on and on. Well, it turned out it was cancer. It was stage 4 sarcoma, which sarcoma primarily hits younger people. So if you've seen a child who's got an amputated limb, that's often sarcoma. Well, as soon as I looked into what the odds were, I knew she was going to die, and it wasn't going to be that long. And so for 2.5 years, she, struggled through treatments and that kind of thing. And the only way that I got through it is I didn't question, why did this happen? I didn't, question, why was I being punished? What did I do wrong? What did she do wrong? I put all of that out of my mind because I can't control that. We have to deal with the fact that she has this terrible disease. And so what are we going to do? What are we going to do today about that? She started having trouble walking. We got a cane. Started having more trouble walking. We got a walker, and then a scooter. And then just so what I tried to focus on for the 2.5 years she was sick was, what can I control? I can't control the fact that she has the disease. I can't control the fact that it's basically incurable. They just don't know enough about it. I can't control the fact that the treatments aren't really doing what they're supposed to do. But what I can do is I can make her more comfortable, or I can spend more time with her. We went on a cruise about 10 days before she died. She wanted to go on a cruise. Well, I can control. I can find a cruise, we can go, and we'll try to have a good time, right here at the end. And so this was all before I knew about Stoicism. But that's why Stoicism was so appealing to me, because it's this philosophy about, first thing you ask is, can I control this? And most of the time the answer is no. So you accept it, you focus on what you can do, and then you let the rest of it go. And there are a number of practices. We could sit here for hours and talk about different things that Stoics do, but really that's the gist of it, is what can you control? And most of what upsets us is either some kind of regret over the past or some kind of anxiety over the future. Well, you certainly can't control the past, right? The past has happened. All you can do is maybe change your opinion of it, but you can't control the past. You might have some effect on the future. If there's a storm, we have a lot of storms where I live. There's a big storm coming in. I can make sure that the generator's working. I can make sure that we've got water and food. There's some things I can do. But if a hurricane's coming for you, the hurricane's coming for you. You cannot control that. You can only control your preparation. And so, getting anxious about the hurricane doesn't do any good. What you have to do is just focus on what you can do to prepare. I will admit, my wife, if she listens to this, will be laughing her head off right now, because I talk a good game. But boy, we get a big storm moving in, I get stressed pretty quickly. But
I know on the show the generator comes up quite a lot as well, which is a lot of fun.
Yes, it does. Yeah,
things.
It's been quite the journey. Yes. So,
yeah.
But that's the basics of Stoicism, and there are a number of books that people could read. Seneca's Letters from a Stoic that's really quite good and quite accessible. Marcus Aurelius was the last good emperor of Rome. He's got his book is Meditations. And then Epictetus was the handbook. And then there's a very good book called, it's The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. and I can get you the full. I'm sorry, I'm not coming up with a full title off the top of my head, but it's by a guy by the name of William Irvine, with an I. That really makes Stoicism very accessible. And so anybody who's interested, I would recommend looking into those. And then there's all kinds of stuff. Ryan Holiday is a big Stoic. But I don't know, it's just helped me a lot because it's this focus on what can you control. We're watching the Olympics, and one of the Stoics, I'm not going to remember exactly who, said never enter a contest that you're not sure of winning. Well, that doesn't mean go play basketball with 7-year-olds. I mean, it's not, but what he's saying is you want to prepare the best you can. You want to be as prepared as you can. You want to, keep your body in good shape or your mind in good shape or whatever it is. And then you do the best you can. And that's the end of it. If you are the best prepared you can possibly be, whatever the outcome is, you've won the contest, because the contest isn't coming in first or getting the job or whatever. It's about the way you've prepared yourself. And so I think Stoicism's got a lot to teach us. It's at the end of the day, it's a very practical philosophy, really at its core.
Yeah.
Sorry, I get excited when I talk about that, but
that's good. One of my favorite things about doing the show is watching people light up with excitement, talking about things they're passionate about. But I just want to thank you for your honesty and openness with your now late wife. Unfortunately, that was that's sad to hear, but I can sympathize due to my dad passed away due to cancer. So it was like he was ill. They discovered it. It was esophageal cancer. They discovered it when it was in stage 3, I think. Then he had about 18 months after it got fully discovered, and then he passed away. So it was, and he went, with my mum. They went on like a couple of holidays and things, like sort of last final things as well. So I understand, that element of things. And here's one of those things, like I would never wish anyone to have someone that they care about, or anyone really, to have cancer, because it is horrendous. But it is one of those things that for a while after Dad passed away, there was that sort of mindset of, would I wish I could go back and, warn him sooner or do something different and that sort of thing. And now that I'm 8 years on, I'm not saying his death was worth it necessarily. It's kind of the wrong perspective, but more so like it wasn't all bad, in the sense that, I'm very lucky I had 19 years with him. I'm very lucky of many things, but also who I'm with now, Megan. I've been with her for 3 years or so now. We're looking to buy a house and sort of other things, and it's my longest relationship and whatnot. But it's like I would almost certainly not be with Megan now if my dad hadn't passed away, because when my dad was ill, he did a gig for charity, and due to that gig for charity, I met my girlfriend at that time, and then things didn't work with them, and there's been girlfriends in between, and then eventually I met Megan. And it's like it's not trying to look at it like the trade-off is someone's life for my current relationship, but it's more so like, as you say, I can't change what happened, but I can kind of look at the silver linings. As you say, the perspective is a very key thing, and I think that's a very common theme in your podcast, and it's very important. It's just, perspective is everything. It's, one of the things, I met Megan on Tinder, and one of the things in my bio was I'm a pessimistic optimist, so I'm a realist. And it was just, I thought it was clever, and clearly she did as well. But it's one of those things where, like, being pessimistic and also being optimistic, they both have their merits in a lot of ways, but it's good to recognize when you're looking at something, the more optimistic view and the more pessimistic view. Right. Like, I try and be realistic with things. I hope for the best, but I expect the worst in a sense. And then if you there's a really simple way, life is much more complicated than this, but like, if you kind of look at life in that way, and you kind of, hopefully things will work out. But if it doesn't, it's like with the generator thing with you and storms. It's like, I hope this storm doesn't come near our house and it goes right past it and we're all fine. But in case it doesn't, I've put these things in place to prepare me just in case.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that gets back to a little bit of the Stoic philosophy, where what can you control? Well, you can look at kind of the worst case and say, okay, what is reasonable for me to do to prepare for this worst case? That doesn't mean you want it to happen. You still want the best case to come out. But if the Stoics actually have a practice called negative visualization, which sounds totally wrong, right? We're taught to, envision yourself winning or getting the job or, whatever it is, closing the sale. But what they say is think about bad things that could happen and then think about how you want to react to them. What would be your emotions? What would you do? And what you're doing is you're kind of rehearsing, and you can get yourself to a point where maybe you can think, I can get through this. This is a much more trivial little story, but I've got a dog named Maggie. She's a border collie, bulldog, sled dog, God knows what else mix. And she's just a fantastic dog. I mean, she's just one of those dogs, smart as can be. She's 14 years old now, still runs around, like she's 3 or 4 years old. But a number of years ago, she just wasn't herself. So we took her to the vet, and the vet said she's got an arrhythmia in her heart. And it's really serious. The vet wanted us to take her down to Phoenix, which was a couple hours away, to see a canine cardiologist. I didn't even know they had such things. Well, we didn't make it very far. The dog was so upset that I said, we're not going to kill our dog trying to save our dog. But I practiced this negative visualization. What would it be? What would my life be like if I woke up and Maggie wasn't there, ready to go for her walk, or wanting to play, or we used to go on hikes. We lived by the base of a mountain. What would my life be? And I prepared myself. And if she had passed away, I would have been better off for that preparation. But there's a really odd thing that happened. She turned out to be fine. She went on some medication for a few years. She's very healthy now. But it made me appreciate her all the more because I had visualized losing her. And so I think, if you can think about this pessimistic view on important things and not wishing that it happens, but just saying, what is my life going to be like if this thing happens? Then if it happens, you're prepared. If it doesn't happen, you're going to appreciate whatever the object of that negative visualization was that much more. So it's kind of counterintuitive. It took me a while to get my head around it. But I think you've kind of come into that in a certain way with this pessimist optimist view that you take. You're prepared both mentally and, you have a generator, or you have water, or whatever it is that you need to have. And I think we've seen that really driven home the last couple of years with the pandemic. I won't tell you how much toilet paper we have at our house, but I was prepared.
That's amazing.
I would count. Okay, so let's see. If we use so many rolls a day, how many?
It's good to be prepared, but you never know. Even over here, like people, all it takes is, one supplier to run out or something, or, even if 1% of the population buys 10 times more than they need, then that will kind of create a knock-on effect, because then, more people will go to stores and see, this store's out of stock. Oh, I need to buy more now. So I go to the next store and buy out. Right. And it's like a domino effect. And it can just, so that happened over here somewhat for a little bit. Which I understand also, being prepared is a very important thing. As you say, like with the pandemic, it was something quite unexpected in a lot of ways. All those things happened. But so back to Stoicism and the sort of the pessimism and things, I find that you never know what life is going to hit you with. It's one of those things. It's one of the beautiful and terrifying things of life. And it is just with the right mindset and the right perspective, it doesn't make, the passing of your wife and the passing of my dad, they weren't easy. And even knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier necessarily. But it was just more so almost just a slight perspective change just made the healing maybe a bit quicker, maybe a bit less painful. It's perspective can be such an important thing for personal, just living in general, but also when these big events happen that you either are or are not prepared for. I think that one's own mindset is so invaluable, really.
It really is. I mean, if I think back on my whole journey with her, so she was going to get sick. That was just going to happen. So if I had not kind of met her and we hadn't fallen in love and gotten married, then sure, I would have missed out on 2.5 years of some really bad times, but I also would have missed out on knowing her. And so, if that's, I remember saying this at the time, if this disease is the price I have to pay for having had her in my life, well, I mean, I'm prepared to pay it. And so, you can't change, I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. You can't change things that are, if something is, it is. So all you can do is try to deal with it in the best way possible. And a big part of that, as you said, is an attitude change. I mean, your dad passed away. He got cancer and he passed away, and you can't do anything about that. But what you can do is, instead of dwelling on how bad that was, how tough that was on you and your family, you can say, okay, well, that's all true, but also it gave me this new perspective on things, and it made me appreciate things that I didn't maybe appreciate otherwise. And so I think that's a really good attitude to have. And I want to acknowledge two things. One, I did not hoard toilet paper, by the way. I was not a hoarder. I want to get that on the record. But the other thing is that there's a lot of what we're talking about here. I don't want to sound glib, like this is simple to do, and easy. It's hard to do. It's hard to do. There's no doubt about it. But you can do it. I mean, people can do these things. They can put these practices into their life. But it does take effort. And it's, the Stoics say, none of us are a sage. None of us are perfect in our practice of whatever our life philosophy is. We're constantly, kind of adjust course and get a little better and learn from our mistakes and so on. So I don't want anybody to think that because maybe they've really struggled with some life events like this, that they're weak or they're dumb. This is hard to do. And I'm looking back on it with over a decade of perspective. So I just want to make sure that we let people know that you can gain that perspective. But if you haven't yet, that's okay too. Everybody's got their own path. Everybody's got their own journey.
Yeah, it's not by any means an easy thing. And there's no right way to do it. I mean, I would probably argue there's some wrong ways to do certain things. I'm not going to delve into those because we'll be here all day, but more so it's one's own personal journey, and people deal with things in different ways. People, like with me, for example, I've said about this in the podcast before. I won't go into the details, but in essence, after Dad passed away, I thought I dealt with it fine. I was like, I saw it coming. It was very sad. I was like 19 and stuff, and I'd finished college and stuff. I had a job and whatnot. And most of my friends around me and things said, you seem generally fine. I'm really surprised how well you're taking this and stuff. And I thought I was taking it really well as well. But I didn't cry about my dad passing. Like, I was in the room with his corpse. He went into a hospice in the day, and then that evening he passed away. And so I saw his body there and things, and my family were there and whatnot, and everyone else was crying, and I wasn't crying. And I got a bit teary, but I didn't actually shed a tear in its essence. And I think it was either 6 months or a year before I did actually cry about it. I'm not saying people have to cry or don't have to cry, anything like that, but it was more so I thought I was fine because I wasn't confronting it in the same way. And I was self-medicating with drugs in certain ways. My life didn't go off the rails and get addicted to horrendous stuff. I still had my job and everything. It was more on the weekend, there's partying, and then there's you're fucking going for it in essence. And that's more so what I was going for. And it was just getting absolutely trashed every weekend and then just waiting for the weekend. And it took a while for me to realize, really, after I stopped doing that kind of destructive lifestyle in a sense. And once again, I didn't lose a job or any friends or loads of money or anything like that. It was just not a healthy way to live. After a couple of years after that, in my sort of earlier 20s and things, I kind of recognized that somewhat. And I was like, I thought I was doing all those drugs and things because that's what I wanted to do, which is partly true. But a lot of it was more so because I wasn't confronting the true feelings I was having. And I was just thinking, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. While I'm doing all these things that are showing I'm not fine. So I'm trying to say, like, it wasn't, and I'm sure you're saying the same thing, which is, it's not the moment the bad thing happens or the event happens when the person passes. It's not the next day you wake up and you're like, I understand everything. Like, some people, it can take months, years, decades even to really recognize how one was feeling at the time. And then once one recognizes that, one can then look and maybe in essence try and steer where they're going, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a process, and everybody's going to experience it in their own way. And And whatever way somebody's experiencing it, it's okay in the moment. If you don't like the way that some kind of negative event is making you feel, well, you can take steps to maybe work yourself out of that. But really the worst thing you can do is to get down on yourself, because you are feeling whatever you're feeling. You're feeling what you're feeling. And so the question is really, what do you want to do about that in the future? Not beating yourself up over the way you feel in the moment. I think another thing that we really need to start paying more attention to is self-compassion.
Mm.
We maybe this is a Western thing, I don't know, but we just can be so hard on ourselves, and just be so self-critical, and you'll tell yourself things that if somebody were relating your experience as their experience, you'd be very compassionate towards them. But we tend to be much harder on ourselves than we are on other people. And I think that can be very damaging. But that's another way that Stoicism can come in handy is, right, if you screw up, you make your girlfriend mad, or you're inconsiderate, or whatever it is, okay, you did that. It's not good. You don't want to do it again, but you shift your focus from, I'm a jerk, to how am I going to avoid repeating that behavior in the future? What are the triggers? I'll give you another example with I've talked about this on the podcast with Tracy, my wife. She grew up in an environment that had some violence in it, without going into a lot of detail. But I inherited my dad's temper. So my old man was one of those guys. Something would happen, he'd get mad. 30 seconds later, it's over with. That's the end of it. And so I got some of that in me. And I made a decision a long time ago to not get mad about things that matter. So I tend to get mad about, traffic or something like that. And I was doing my normal routine. And somebody would be going slow, and I'd be cussing about it in the car, and not ramming them or blaring my horn, but just, being basically dickish inside the car, to have our word for the day. And then I noticed what it was doing to Tracy. I wasn't mad at her. I wasn't expressing any of this towards her, but I could see her almost kind of cower over against the passenger side door. And I thought, man, you got to stop this. Maybe it's nothing to you. It's just a release to you, but look what it's doing to somebody that you love. And so, I won't say I'm perfect, but I'm much better. I just don't, at least I won't express my frustration at things like that anymore. But, it's not, if I was just going to beat myself up, oh, you're a terrible person, you've got this anger problem, you're horrible. That doesn't do any good. It's like, all right, look, I'm going to think about this rationally. This is a person I love. This activity that's totally pointless. I mean, getting mad and cussing at somebody doesn't make them go any faster. So, what's the point? This thing that has no value for me or for anything objectively is harming this person that I love. So I'm not going to beat myself up over having done it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put mental breaks in, where if I feel myself starting to get like that, I'm going to stop. And my visualization is, all right, if I start yelling, I'm going to visualize Tracy over there cowering, and all upset because of whatever reason. And so, you just train yourself over time to do better. But my point, I know I got a little long-winded there, but my point is, if you dwell on, you're a terrible person because you act this way, you don't get anywhere. That just doesn't move you anywhere positive at all. But if you say, I'm not going to do this anymore, how am I going to embed this practice of not doing this anymore into my life? How am I going to do that? Now you've placed a future-oriented, growth-oriented, improvement-oriented perspective on it, instead of this, I'm an asshole perspective, which may well have been true, but it's in the past. You can't do anything about it anyway. You were an asshole. You don't have to be an asshole in the future. So
it's a very good way to put it.
I thought we needed to change the words up a little bit.
No, of course. It is one of those things. It's like I'm going to be paraphrasing the quote, but it's basically just, it's not about being better than someone else. It's about being better than you were yesterday.
Right.
And that's just all one can do. I'm never going to be as good at, cooking as Gordon Ramsay, let's say. I'm not a very good cook anyway. So it's definitely not going to be that way, but it's not. If I compare myself to someone who's top of the tier of something, then I'll always fall short. But if I just compare how I am today to yesterday, then hopefully it will be generally an improvement. I mean, yesterday is a bit too much of a shorter time span, more so the last few weeks or months or whatever, just generally trying it. All one needs to do really is just try to be better than they were the day before. And if you generally go with that mindset and you're, with the right self-compassion, as you've pointed out, generally your life will be better. Like it's not a simple thing. All of these ideas are just ways to somewhat help one deal with life. It just little ways. There's no, here's the answer. Stoicism. You do Stoicism and then your life's going to be better forever. It's not that simple. And I know you're not saying that. No. It is just one has to try and see what works for them. And whatever way of interpreting that is how it works with some people. And as you say, with being compassionate about oneself, one thing, Megan can be quite hard on herself. And what I try and say to her is like, if she's very good at cooking and things, but she puts too much on to make herself cook, and then she'll maybe mess up one thing slightly and it won't look as perfect as she wanted to do. And then she gets upset because the people coming over, she thinks they're going to hate it and stuff. And I'm just like, right, try and look at it like this. If you went over their house and they made you all this food and that thing looked the way it did, would you be angry at them? Would you hate them? Or would you be thankful they made all this food for you? And she'd be like, oh, well, I'd be thankful for it. And I'm like, I try and, one has to be very empathetic towards other people. But as you say, like, I hadn't necessarily thought about it in such a grand scheme, but I think you are right. I think especially in the Western world, especially when the work ethic is such an important thing, and especially, men have a lot of privilege in the Western world, but one thing that they do not have and they suffer with a lot, I find, is discussing vulnerability and emotion. And I think that self-compassion is kind of linking arms with that, recognizing when you're wrong, recognizing when you've done good things and trying to be like, oh, that's cool. That's nice for you to do. Well done. And I think a lot of those things that you've pointed out are very important.
Well, and it also, that kind of a mindset also gives you permission to try things. I mean, think about, when you started your podcast. I mean, I don't know. Did you have a radio background or anything like that?
Not really. No, I did a bit of YouTube stuff for a while, but nothing major.
Yeah, I mean, same here. So, I mean, I'm an old man. I have a very lofty title. I'm an eminent scholar. So I've kind of achieved what I wanted to achieve, a lot of it professionally. And, I could sit back and cruise but by saying, okay, it's okay to learn, to try something and not quite get it right and, tweak it a little bit, that sort of thing. You don't have to be perfect out of the gate. So let's start a podcast. If you have this mindset where you're just going to hate yourself for every little mistake you make, well, you'd never try anything new. Why would you start a podcast if you're afraid that you're going to suck at it? Or if you're just a little bit less than perfect, it's going to make you miserable. And so if you have this self-compassion and this, I don't know, it's a little bit cliche-ish, but failing forward, I'm going to try it and I'm going to see what doesn't work. And if one thing doesn't work, I'm going to try it to tweak it a little bit and I'm going to get better. If you feel like you can't give yourself any compassion when things haven't quite gone the way you would want them to, then that really keeps you in this kind of comfort zone box. I have a saying, comfort is the enemy of progress. And so I really, Andrea doesn't agree with me on this 100%, but I think it's good for us to always be a little uncomfortable, where we're always wanting, I think this could be a little bit better. This could be a little bit better. I could do this a little bit differently. That's how you grow. But you have to be willing to be compassionate to yourself when things don't go the way you want them to. Tracy is actually great at this. She's a really good cook. And when she tries a new recipe, if it isn't quite right, it's okay if it's not quite right. Her her thing is she's going to try a new recipe. And if it isn't quite right, she's going to try to figure out what isn't quite right about it. And then maybe a little more salt, a little less salt. Maybe she needs to cook it less, a little bit more, whatever it is. And then the second time, it'll be better.
Mm-hmm.
And usually by the third time she's made something, it's fantastic. But if she was going to beat herself up over the first time not being perfect, I'd be eating ham sandwiches for dinner every night. So, really, but I think that's an important point. If you're going to be overly perfection focused and not have this compassion for yourself when things don't go right, then you're just not going to try challenging things.
Yeah, I agree entirely. It's very, very well put, in all honesty. And we're getting sort of towards the hour mark. There's no rush to immediately finish or anything like that. But I wondered if there was sort of anything else you wanted to add to that sort of element.
Well, I think that really this time in history, it's a time to just give ourselves and everybody else a break. I've talked about this at my university and said it's not a time to be a hard ass. I'm usually pretty strict on deadlines and that kind of thing, but we're going through a pandemic. We've literally never faced this before. I mean, I know we had the Spanish flu back in 1911 or whatever it was, but it was a completely different world then. I mean, we are literally in something that nobody really, well, I don't know, maybe somebody envisioned it, but basically had not been envisioned before. And so we're all going to get some of this right and we're all going to get some of this wrong. And so I don't know if you may want to cut this part, but the vaccine, the big controversy. And I see a lot of things on social media where if you're not getting the vaccine, you're an idiot, you're evil. It's like, wait a second. There are reasons to be a little bit hesitant to get this particular vaccine or this family of vaccines. They haven't been thoroughly tested. We don't know what the long-term side effects are going to be. There's a lot we don't know. And so just because somebody is struggling with that doesn't necessarily mean they're an idiot or they're evil. I mean, I got the vaccine because I thought, okay, what do I think the side effects are going to be versus, like I said, I'm an older guy. If I get it, it could be really bad, especially since I have to do a lot of work to kind of maintain our property. It would be really bad. And so, yeah, maybe there will be side effects down the road, but to me, that risk is not nearly as important as the risk of me getting COVID. But that doesn't mean it's the only way to think. I mean, I think that's the way to think, but that's not the only way to think. And so, we need to just cut everybody a little bit of slack these days, not be so quick to judge. I don't know. It's a strange time. So, but that self-compassion, we want to have our own self-compassion, but we also want to be more understanding of other people that might disagree with us.
I agree completely with that. I mean, I had a debate with some of my friends in a group chat, and we were talking about vaccine. Like I've had the first vaccine. My second vaccine is due in about a month. So around the time this airs, I'll be closer to having my second vaccine. Megan's had both shots of it and things. Most people I know have had one or two shots of it and things. And I had a discussion debate with my friends because one of them was saying, I can't believe people won't get vaccines and that sort of thing. And I was like, it's like, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Vaccines don't cause autism. That's been scientifically proven. However, I am in that thing where there is that part of me, and Megan shared it to some degree, if there's that worry of like, we want to have kids someday. If this vaccine, they've only been testing it for, if you could be really optimistic with it, a few years, even if it's before COVID and stuff, even if they were testing it before that, a few years, it's like, to know the long-term repercussions of decades ahead, you just can't know. Like, I trust science. I hope, and I get the vaccine because, I don't want to, be unvaccinated. Then I get the vaccine, I get COVID and give it to my mum who's, 60 something years old. And then if something happened to her because I wasn't vaccinated, or something happened to someone else, random person on a bus or whatever, I don't want to put that on someone. I think that, okay, I'll bite the bullet. I'll get the vaccine, even if I'm not 100% certain it's going to be perfect and there's not going to be any negative side effects in the long term. It is, as you say, it's the risk. And it's just like, well, I don't want to get COVID. I don't want to give it to other people. All the science we have does point towards it being fine. But people who are just a bit skeptical and a bit worried, people who, are wanting to have kids, and, there's been, I know it's in really older history, decades and decades ago, but there's been, birth control medication and babies' milk and things like that, which have not been vetted properly, or some things have happened, and then babies have come out like with illnesses, or have come out deformed, all kinds of things that have happened, which at the time the science was saying everything's fine, don't worry about it. Right. And then the long-term repercussions showed that wasn't entirely true because of XYZ. And I'm not saying the vaccine doesn't work, and I know that's not what you're saying either. We've both been vaccinated. I want to clarify that to the audience. But it is, as you say, you want to cut people some slack. If someone is a bit skeptical, talk them, point them to the evidence. Say, chances are things will be fine. If you look at these reasonings, they have tested the vaccine more than maybe you first thought. It is a risk and things, but it's kind of, you have to be aware that if you don't have the vaccine, you may not be allowed into nightclubs or music gigs and things like that. And if that's fine with you, okay, that's your choice in life. But right. Yeah, I think when someone has a different opinion on something and being so against them and being so militant against them, I think that doesn't necessarily help people in most ways. I think compassion is something that one can try, even if you think the other person is wrong. Try and be empathetic and try and be like, okay, why are they thinking like this? How can we communicate in a sense,
Well, if you want to persuade somebody, the first step is to listen to them. And you listen to them in order to understand their perspective. And then you can come at whatever the issue is, whether it's a vaccine or, what restaurant to go to. You can come at it in a way that's persuasive without being manipulative. But if you just are closed-minded, where you're just convinced that they're idiots, well, that doesn't get anybody anywhere. I mean, how would any of us react if we disagree with somebody and they just say, well, you're just an idiot, if that's what you think? I mean, my first thought would be, screw you.
Yeah.
Although that would not be the term I would use, but it'd be, get out of my face. I don't want to talk to you anymore. It doesn't accomplish anything. And the science points in a certain direction. This is another piece you may want to cut out. But the thing about science is it's rarely, if ever, settled. We've seen that in the pandemic. The CDC, the WHO, the advice has changed, the guidelines have changed, and some people say, well, that they don't know what they're doing. Well, they're figuring this out, and so they're going to give the best guidance they can with what they know today. 2 weeks from now, they're going to give the best guidance they can based on what they know 2 weeks from now. And so I think if we can just all take a breath and say, we're all kind of trying to get through this ride together, it doesn't really help anything if we're at each other's throats. And I don't care which side of the political aisle somebody's on. It's just not helpful. So I'm sorry, that was my political
apologize for never apologize on this show. As long as you're not being horrendously bigoted to a certain group of people, I never ask him to apologize. It's this whole show is about being open and being honest. And I agree with with all the points that you've made. Science is ever changing. Completely agree. There are reasons people are skeptical of vaccines. One has to try and be compassionate. And we're coming towards the end here, and I'll let you sort of plug your stuff in a moment. But I did also want to thank you, because I think there's not enough people openly talking about trying to have a middle ground, trying to be compassionate, being vulnerable and open. Obviously, you told us about your late wife, which I do really appreciate the honesty there, and being vulnerable in that sense. I very much respect that as someone who's been in a somewhat similar situation, with my dad and things. And it's one of those things that people being vulnerable is just such an important thing. And especially being a man and being open and honest and vulnerable with things, I think is something that it's slowly happening more as it goes on, but I think it's still something that is lacking a lot. And especially where obviously I'm a fairly young guy and you're a slightly older gentleman, it's even more important, I find, with someone. you're not old.
Anybody that's watching this on YouTube knows what an understatement that
is. But young spirited. I don't know if that makes it worse. But like, I appreciate, yourself being open and honest with those sort of things. It generally means a lot to me, and I know that a lot of my listeners really respect that as well. And like, especially because you've got a podcast and things now, and you'll be podcasting for forever until your deathbed, decades and decades, you're always going to be podcasting. That's a fact. And spreading the good word and things, it's something that's important. So I just want to say thank you for you sort of doing that. And are there any sort of final comments before you do all your plugs and things? Just sort of any final statements, anything you want to kind of add toward the end there?
Just remember, life is tough, and you'll do some things right and you'll do some things wrong. Just don't beat yourself up over it, and look to the future.
Wonderful. That's perfect. Well, so obviously your show is the Rational Ignorance podcast. I will include links to that in the description, but I don't know if you want to tell people if there's website or social media or anything else related, or anything you want to add about the show that hasn't already been said. And then we'll kind of wrap this up.
Sure. So the website is RationalIgnorance-podcast.com. That's got links to all of our socials there. On Twitter, we're at the RI podcast. I'm fairly active on Twitter, so feel free to reach out. And we're getting ready to open up our second season. Actually, starts tomorrow, which is on human flourishing. And so, if you like these kinds of things, we're going to be covering everything from Aristotle to Stoicism to Buddhism to music, art. So a really wide-ranging array of things and philosophies that can help people flourish, help people live the way that humans are meant to live. And so I think people get a lot out of it. I know we will. So that's why we do it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
And it's wonderful. I do want to say just thank you again for coming on the show. It's been an absolute delight speaking with you. And I know how busy you've been today, especially. So finding the time to speak with me, I do really, really appreciate it. And, we'll have to do this again sometime, because there's so many other elements of things that either you can bring some subjects to the table, but obviously before pressing record, there are loads of different things we could have touched on. But because, I know it's a great conversation when the majority of my bullet points aren't touched. So
great. Well,
thank you for the fruitful conversation. I'm thoroughly, I'm glad that you enjoyed it very much. And, just thank you for coming on, dude.
All right. Well, you're welcome. And thanks for having me. I'm glad we were able to connect.
Wonderful.